Welcome to vlog 17. May is one of my favourite months of the year, especially when the weather is gorgeously summery, and it often is. It's been a bit more difficult this year, especially as the cost of living crisis is biting. Meteorologically, this year has also seen a fair number of cold and rainy days. So, for instance, on 6th of May, when King Charles III was coronated or crowned, my gran used to say, "I'll crown you," in her Lancastrian accent. She said it jovially, but in essence, the phrase infers punishment. I participated quite a lot in the coronation activities during that extra bank holiday weekend. Even though I'm not a huge royalist, I found it quite lovely. I'm not an anti-monarchist either. I watched some of the ceremonial shenanigans on the Saturday and shared comments on Facebook. It was quite nice having conversation, observations with friends on social media, and getting involved kind of made up for all the diversions on my walking routes on the days before and after the big day. It's been a bit difficult with all the barriers in Westminster. I was going to watch the big flyby and I headed out into the drizzle before the event that was scheduled for 2:30, and just as I heard the roar of the aeroplanes as they flew in across central London, my phone rang, and whilst I tried to take a couple of photos, I spent the next 45 minutes getting soaked in what became increasingly heavy rain as I sat under a tree in the park catching up with a friend, and that matters more to me anyway. I hadn't spoken to that friend for a few weeks. Thanks to YouTube, it was still possible to watch what turned out to be a very much pruned down flypast. Someone had broadcast from a rooftop vantage point. It truly was inclement weather. On Sunday the 7th of May, it was really lovely and sunny, and I joined in the big lunch picnics, especially in particular a marvellous one in Arundel Square where I spotted my Member of Parliament Emily Thornberry and had a chat and a selfie. I also made a new friend, someone who'd come over from Canterbury, and I enjoyed some of the food before heading up towards Holloway, where a friend lives, to another community event where I enjoyed some wine. Didn't actually meet up with a friend though, but it was all really good fun. I wish there were more of these community events. It's going to be a long time before there's something similar, such as when Charlie celebrates his Silver Jubilee, which I think would be in 2047. However, the big lunch happens every year, so next year I shall look out for and join in whatever community events take place once again. On to the films. I thought I'd start doing more categorised summary reviews, and for this month I'll be focusing on dramas. There are many films that share more than one genre, but I'm going to cover some of the recent films that are listed on IMDb, at least under drama. I'll start with Another Round, 2020. It's a drama and comedy. It's directed by Thomas Vinterberg, who the first film I became acquainted with was It's All About Love, 2003. Very strange film. Kind of liked it, but it was set in 2021, and of course, although it didn't predict the lockdown, it was really kind of dystopian, strange events happening. I might review that one day because it is one of those really strange films that has stuck with me many years later, and it was set in what was the future, now is the past, so comparing it with what actually happened in 2021 might be interesting. Another film of his is Dear Wendy and Far from the Madding Crowd, 2015. I've seen all of those films. But this film, Another Round, is the story of four teachers, including Mads Mikkelsen's Martin. They're high school teachers, secondary school. They have a boisterous crowd of teenagers that they deal with who go padlocking security guards when they're travelling on the tube having a party. Well, these four men, they enjoy the odd tipple. When they get together to have a drink, one of them mentions once a Norwegian philosopher who postulated that people are born with too low a blood alcohol level, 0.05% too low. And so the four of them decide to test out this theory by drinking during the working day. They don't drink in the evenings and weekends. It's something that Ernest Hemingway advocated. They start writing about this thesis. It's kind of pseudo-scientific, but they put down their thoughts and observations as they get about, and it's a kind of reversal of the accepted norm about drinking in the evenings. They drink in the daytime and they try and keep up their alcohol levels, measuring it with breathalyzers. The four of them find some success with this first level of their studies. The trouble is they decide to up the levels. It's kind of like mission creep. As they push the boundaries, their concept spells a recipe for disaster. Trouble looms on the horizon. I was watching with a friend and I speculated on how this situation might get out of hand, and I think I was fairly accurate. Not with everything. I mean, one character displays a burst of violence which I wasn't expecting, and I thought it was quite unforgivable, but things don't always go the way you expect. Oh, of course, twists and turns in the story that come with the mind of the writer. People are, of course, unpredictable. Despite this, I found a lot of the first and second act quite fun to watch, perhaps in a slightly cringy kind of way, but as the lessons and the consequences started to manifest, things got really difficult in a sort of told you so way. Adults behaving like teenagers, people before they realise the likely consequences. Anyone could see that, surely. I shall score that 7 out of 10. Next film is still Magnolias, 1989. It's one of my 20th century classic films. I'm not sure what I made of it. I sometimes find films from that era rather wacky. How to Get Ahead in Advertising is one case that really springs to mind. That comedy was really out there. That type of humour really doesn't appeal to me. I just found it perplexing. And there were elements in this film that really bothered me as well. There's these guys who start shooting at the bird in the trees. The whole idea of a number of mass shootings, the power of the gun lobby, especially nowadays, really freaks me out. But even back then, a few decades ago, there are strange things that feel very alien about the USA. In lots of ways, I really love America. I've enjoyed several wonderful holidays there. I've got good friends out there. I don't think many of them actually don't carry guns. As a rule, they aren't like the people in this film. But one thing is, this story is focused on women, and they are strong and they're tenacious and they face the ups and downs of life, and there are some really significant events that they deal stoically. And there's humour and there's grief. This film is described in the trailer as the funniest movie that will make you cry, but I didn't laugh or cry, so I suppose some of it may have washed over me. Perhaps I was too tired when I watched it, and perhaps I could see it again and maybe I'll take more from it. I do appreciate there was some really excellent acting from Dolly Parton, Shirley MacLaine, Daryl Hannah, Julia Roberts, and it's really good seeing that. I shall score that 7 out of 10 as well. Alone Together 2022. This is set in the first pandemic lockdown of 2020, middle of March in New York City. The film is directed and written and stars Kate Holmes. As the stay-at-home mandates are declared, the trains are cancelled, and she needs to get a lift to an upstate countryside Airbnb. She feels quite alienated. One of the things she observes is that it's only essential workers that matter. Of course, that's not entirely true, as all the mutual self-aid groups that sprang up here in London attest to. I thought there was a lot all about about keeping in touch with people. I suppose those were her early observations, but there was a sense of community. There certainly was the possibilities for that. Of course, some people really did feel isolated, and it did depend on your point in life and your sense of self, I guess. Essentially, with this story, I saw the words "Love in Lockdown" written large on a path on Primrose Hill, and that is the nub of this story. It turns out that June, played by Kate Holmes, has rented a space that has been double booked by Charles, a young man played by Jim Sturgis. They don't get on brilliantly to start with, but they reluctantly agree to share the space. And after the initial tensions melt away, they seem to grow to like each other. They find they're on a similar wavelength in some ways, and one thing I really liked was when June says that she really likes films that involve human development, human interaction. I think those are the films that appeal to me the most, so I feel more of an affinity with characters who feel that way. Anyway, they seem to get along, June and Charles, but then the arrival of an ex throws a spanner in the works. It turns this whole situation into a quandary. Lockdown eased in the end, and of course life returns to normal after all the surreal atmosphere that lockdown brought. One of June's friends says how maybe she'll be one of the few people who the situation actually develops into something, a new relationship. That's not something many other people could write home about during that particular era. I do actually remember more or less at exactly the same time, middle of March, that this film starts with someone tried chatting me up, and I just thought, what, just right now? I've got hand gels, just like, what? And in this film, as June's riding out in a taxi out into the countryside, the taxi driver talks about having hand gel. It was such a big deal at that time because there was a shortage of that, and toilet rolls and lots of empty shelves, and the worry about people stockpiling stuff, and the relief of actually finding some places that did have lots of food. The way some people relied on takeout food, never learnt to cook and never wanted to cook. I mean, seems like that come up in this film. There's so much to think about. There's so much. I can imagine films like this, when they get watched in a few years' time, in a few decades, it'll be of social interest, social history, the kind of thing that, unless there's more similar situations in the intervening years, the lockdowns of the early 2020s, hopefully there won't be. This story, I really loved it. I'll score it 8 out of 10. There's a lot of pensive reflection on the passage of time, how we look from 2023 on just 3 years ago, how different things were, how our fears and our self-reflections on things. Deadshot 2023. This is set during the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland in the 70s. This film stars two men on opposite sides during the hostilities. One is in the British Army, and the army are tracking what they call a bandit from the IRA, and he's rushing with his wife who's pregnant, taking her to hospital. She's in labour, but they get stopped in the countryside, and she persuades him to run because she thinks they're only going to be after him. They don't see that he's left the car and ran off up the hill into the woods, and they open fire on the car and they kill her. That's the start of this film, and so it becomes a really heavy film of vengeance. He gets consumed with the thought of tracking down the soldier who killed his pregnant wife. The man from the IRA, he's got contact with spies, people who can locate. Felicity Jones stars as one of the characters. She's able to track down this army guy, and all gets very heated. Acts of terrorism in Kentish Town, not that far away from where I live, and feels a different world, and yet the Troubles were 50 years ago. This was set maybe under 50 years ago, about 1975. A really, really difficult time. Packs a lot of emotional punch, and it does also really show what it must feel like to be both characters. That's one thing I really liked about this film. It could actually see both sides, both protagonists. I'll score that 8 out of 10. Really punchy film really got some feeling. Final score 2018. This was set around West Ham. One thing about it, the rating, it was kind of given a 15, but the original rough cut I read featured 2 sadistic scenes, and it was given a certificate 18, and it has some eerie parallels with the geopolitics of today, as there was a war going on that involves Russia. There was a breakaway state in this story that's trying to become independent, but in a sense it doesn't feel far off the current scenario in Ukraine. The plot involves a terrorist attack on a stadium during a football match. West Ham is a team at the European Cup final, and it's a team my late sister supported, so that kind of gelled with me in a way. She might have liked this film. I gather it was filmed at the Bowling Ground after it was decommissioned as a football stadium, but before it was redeveloped. So it's kind of interesting legacy finale for the place before the Hammers moved to the Olympic Park. It's all gritty, hard-edged stuff. This guy who is kind of paramilitary, he's been involved in the fight in this war of independence, and there's this rivalry that goes on. He has got connections with the people, but they're on the other side, and he's got relatives. He goes with his niece to this match, and the stakes are high, heavy stuff happens. It was mildly interesting and watchable. Probably give it 6 out of 10, because I've seen a lot of dramas like that, so it was a bit samey in some ways. It's a bit like the sort of average Jason Statham type film, but with different actors. You know, there's moments of I kind of liked him. I'd say I'm glad I watched it. My Neighbour Adoplh 2022. This was directed by Leon Prodowski. It's set in South America in 1960, and David Heyman stars as Mr. Polsky, a survivor of the Holocaust who is disturbed by the arrival of a new neighbour. Initially because his black roses are threatened because of dogs who enter his garden. He lovingly tends to these black roses. When his garden's under threat, it upsets him. Udo Kier plays the man who Mr. Polsky meets, and when he takes his sunglasses off, he sort of recognises what he thinks is a familiar face, and it's that of Adolf Hitler. He becomes convinced that the German despot has been hiding, taking refuge in Argentina. Rather than dying in 1945, he's now living in exile. The moment he compares seeing his eyes, it's quite chilling. I actually really felt that moment. Just thought, oh gosh, I've seen quite a few films involving the Nazi era, and this halt to some of those moments. But there's a lot of elements of dark humour as well. Mr. Polsky develops a strategy because he talks to the authorities and they want some substantive proof when he makes these claims, so he has to do some covert Zoom photography, but then he resorts to making friends with this guy and starts snooping around his house for evidence. I mean, it's kind of a bit uncomfortable, and yet it was fun in ways. I'd score it 7 out of 10. Love Again 2023. This is directed by Jim Strauss. The main character is Meera Ray, played by Priyanka Chopra Jonas. She's smitten over her fella at the start of this film, but tragically she looks on helplessly when he is mown down by a drunk driver. And whilst we don't actually see the awfulness of this event, we observe her reaction as the sounds of the collision take place. I guess that's quite a nice way of doing it. But 2 years later, when she's still grieving, she started to send text messages to his number, feeling assured that they will either disappear into the ether, or perhaps by typing out these words, she feels that the communications will somehow get to him in a different plane of existence. I don't know how long it is before cell phone numbers are recycled, but when I changed my SIM, someone in the shop said it is a significant amount of time. Rob Burns is a Brit working in New York. He's got a quite heavy-going, aggressive British boss. He's issued with a new work phone, and he's surprised when these heartfelt messages start to ping through. He tells a couple of colleagues about it, and then one evening Meera sends a message speech, which reveals where she's going to be. She's going to a particular bar, and Rob's inquisitiveness gets the better of him. So he goes along with a friend who suggests it might be a particular guy who's in that bar, but one other possibility is actually Mira. But then he also ends up going to an opera that she goes to and really enjoys the opera. At the end of it, he gets to meet her. He doesn't tell her that he's been getting the messages from her, so you know that's going to be a source of tension later. And there's this added complication that Rob is a musical journalist and he interviews Celine Dion. I'm not sure about this element in the narrative, but it might have been that I was distracted by the chatter from nearby seats. I was in the cinema watching this film with a friend, but unfortunately it was one of those occasions when a couple of disruptive audience members arrived just as the film was started, and they spent much of the movie talking to each other. They were so noisy and inconsiderate that I moved to a different seat, but even people further away were glaring at them, and if looks could kill, the auditorium would have been a crime scene. I think they were intentionally trying to ruin the experience for everyone else, since they deliberately chose seats close to other people, and they were using their torch function on their phones and just chit-chatting away like they were in their own living room. It didn't really make sense. Why spend good money doing that when it would be cheaper to watch a film at home, unless they actually derive pleasure from angering other people and spoiling the film for other people. Anyway, rant over. I'll give this film 7 out of 10. It might have deserved half a point or a point more in different circumstances. I sort of enjoyed it. When I talked with my friend, we decided it was a bit formulaic and predictable in some ways. Saw how it was likely to develop. I enjoyed it, I suppose, apart from people sitting nearby. Now, there's a few other films that I'd like to talk about. I think they will probably deserve their own episodes. I think I may need to work out a plan for how I get through a whole pile of films during the next few weeks. Some films I really like that I think deserve more than the short summaries I give in this kind of blog. Thanks for watching. Let me know any thoughts you have about these films, and bye for now.